What's up, everybody? Welcome to Texas Food Systems, where we talk about food freedom, controversy, and independence in the food and health system. My name is Jordan. Hello. And I live on a small homestead in Northeast Texas, where we raise ducks and mucks for meat and eggs, and we also experiment with sustainable building and farming practices. Sounds like I'm wearing a trash bag. Here we go. Hello. All right, so today we're actually going to talk about this whole So how did I hear about this? Well, I was scrolling on my Instagram the other day, and then I got struck in the face by a post that said something like this. I've been contacted by the Trump transition team to hold some sort of position within the USDA and have accepted one of 6 advisory to the secretary spots. Well, this quote was by none other than Joel Salatin. I was peeing my pants. I've been following this guy for a long time. For God's sake, I got his book as a Christmas gift last year.
What? You sneaky left this. I almost bought this,
By the way, great book if you really want to learn about the politics side of farming and all the kind of bureaucracy stuff, which is why I really like the idea of him going into office to help. He's going to have some kind of influence on our food system over the next 4 years, which is amazing. So, that was loud. And I've been wanting to do a post on this for a while, but here we are. It's a week later. Without further ado, let's get started. All right, so we're gonna scroll over to the lunaticfarmer.com, go under blog, and then under the blog titled Celebration, that's the one that we're gonna be reading. The deplorables and the garbage people won again. Can you believe it? I've been contacted by the Trump transition team to hold some sort of position within the USDA and have accepted one of 6 advisory to the secretary spots. My favorite congressman, Thomas Massie from Kentucky, has agreed to go in as Secretary of Agriculture. He has been the sponsor of the PRIME Act, which, if pushed through, would be the biggest shot across the bow of the entrenched industrial meat processing system we've seen in the century. Let liberty ring. Wouldn't that be a change of fortune for Big Ag? If RFK Jr. goes in as Secretary of Health and Human Services, everything will be inverted. Talk about the coolest turnabout. He'd be the boss of the Faucis and Francis Collins, the whole COVID anti-science crowd. Wouldn't that be a change of fortune for Big Pharma? And if Elon Musk goes in as the government waste czar, do you think he could possibly find something? Here is an interesting tidbit. All the income taxes in the US are $2 trillion a year. Government spending and borrowing are so out of control that if we eliminated $2 trillion from the budget, it would only set us back to 2020. Does anyone think returning to government spending in 2020 would destroy things? Of course not. So, all we have to do is cut the federal spending to 2020 levels and we can eliminate income tax. Period. Done. How would that make you feel? Most people don't know enough history to know that the federal government was being financed entirely from tariffs and excise taxes. In fact, as a nation, we operated just fine for nearly 150 years without an income tax, and the only president who eliminated the national debt was Andrew Jackson. And he did it by eliminating the second bank of the US. Nearly 100 years later, we got a third bank, known as the Federal Reserve, plus the income tax. During that time, tariffs averaged 40 to 50%. After the income tax, tariffs dropped to an average of about 7%, where they remain today. If we went back to 40% like we had for nearly 150 years, we would bring production home and free our citizens from the impoverishing taxes. Dear folks, this is a watershed moment to take a creative and serious look at the sacred cows in our nation and to fry some serious burgers. We don't know history, we don't know liberty, and we don't know earthworms or aquifers or immune systems. I'm hoping this election is an opening to discovery. Perhaps we could even figure out how to put negative occurrences like jails, pollution, and cancer on the nation's balance sheet as a liability rather than an asset. Gross domestic product equals more jails. Wonderful. Pour more concrete and make more jobs. Perhaps we'll eliminate federal involvement in education from kindergarten to college and make every teacher accountable to performance. Eliminate all federal intervention in the food system, in farming, and energy. The Constitution, read it, doesn't allow for any of this, and it's time to examine all of it. Shut down foreign military bases, bring them all home. Stop all foreign aid from USAID and military aid. Sell stuff is fine, giving it isn't. I think whatever taxes we pay should be able to be designated to certain departments. That way, the people could support or defund departments directly. The reason we have K Street is because all our freedoms are for sale. Eliminate government manipulation, and the lobbyists all go home. These are simple things. Let's do it. What is your first request for the Trump and RFK Jr. agenda? Whew, that's a long winder. Let's kind of dive into it. I need to get some of this brain junk to keep me alive. Because everyone has a vice. Right now, this is mine. Don't judge me. All right, so some of you may not know who Joel Salatin is. If you don't have anything to do with the farm or homesteading world, he's gotten all over the place. So, I mean, pretty much, if you have ever put, any kind of chicken out on a pasture, you've heard of Joel Salatin, because, he pretty much invented the chicken tractor. Joel Salatin was born in 1957 and grew up on a farm in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, where he became fascinated with farming at an early age. After attending Bob Jones University, he returned home to work on his family's farm. His big break came when he started experimenting with sustainable farming methods, like rotational grazing, which means moving animals around to ensure soil regeneration. Salatin is a self-described Christian, libertarian, environmentalist capitalist, which sounds like a lot, right? But it's all about individual freedom in farming, and he believes that small farms can feed the world in a way that industrial agriculture just can't. He's opposed to the monopolies of agribusinesses and the overregulation of government agencies, claiming it stifles real innovation and growth. And Salatin's big impact came when he became a spokesperson for local sustainable food systems. His polyphase farm is legendary for being one of the first to challenge conventional farming practices, and they raise a variety of animals, including cattle, pigs, chickens, and turkeys, using methods that emphasize biodiversity and soil health. I've also seen him raise rabbits. The farm sells its products locally, bypassing the industrial system to create more ethical and environmentally friendly way to produce food. Joel's books, including You Can Farm, The Omnivore's Dilemma, where he's featured, and Folks, This Ain't Normal, have made him a major thought leader in sustainable agriculture. He's written 15 books, and a lot of it is about how you can be pretty self-sufficient and make more money on your farm. His work has sparked a movement to the local food revolution, which encourages consumers to buy from small independent farmers and opt for ethically produced food. He's also a huge critic of the U.S. agriculture system. He believes government subsidies to big agribusinesses are not just economically wasteful, but are ruining the land, creating unhealthy food and pushing out small-scale farmers. Salatin's ideas are revolutionary in the farming world, challenging the status quo and pushing for a fundamental shift in how we view food production. If you're into the farm-to-table movement, you can't talk about it without mentioning Joel Salatin. He's changed the way people think about where the food comes from and how it's grown. And while some think he's too radical or anti-establishment, there's no denying his massive influence on the food system. Personally, I came across Joel Salatin when I was trying to figure out how I was going to raise chickens. I didn't even have chickens yet. I had an audio version of Pastured Poultry Profit, so I had listened to the book. And I was like, maybe I should start a chicken farm. But anyways, I got into him because I was big into regenerative agriculture before I actually ever had a farm, and then ran into the beef book. Was like, well, yeah, beef. Need beef if I want a regenerative farm. Well, the thing is, I was not gonna start with beef because I, at the time, lived in a city and we don't put beef on a lawn. So I got the chicken book instead. And then I was like, wait, you can make money from this? I thought farmers were poor. So yeah, You Can Farm. That's this book. It's actually about how you can make money in farming. Yeah, but he's got a lot of stuff, and this one's like the political stuff. This is just chock full of information on how you can be a renegade. We definitely think that the Joel Salatin style chicken tractor was kind of cool. We got into it. We built one. We looked at the John Siskovich style, and we ended up going with something more like that without the roof. So we can't walk into our chicken tractors, but we have a door that lifts up on top and then a roost that goes along the bottom. So they're a lot lighter, and they're top accessible, and then actually one of them has a door on the outside as well, so we can just like open it and let the monsters go if they want to. So I have watched a bunch of videos of Joel Salatin, and I used to be really afraid of like, how am I going to slaughter an animal by myself, because I'm kind of like a do-it-yourselfer. So I found a video of him actually processing a chicken. I was like, oh, after watching him explain it for about an hour and change, it actually doesn't seem so bad. Tried it, hated it. I don't know. There's just something about chickens. I can process rabbits, I can process quail, chicken, like whatever. But like the chickens, for some reason, I just don't like it. But it at least helped me separate my mentality of, oh my God, I'm killing an animal, to being like, I can do this nicely so the animal doesn't suffer. It had a good life. And he really was able to alleviate my mentality of like, oh my God, to like, it's food, you know? Anyway, they had a good life. They are out on pasture all the time, and they were not confined in a large warehouse with other sick birds that are all fat and lazy with no beaks and no feathers. So, I mean, they lived a good life. Now they're in the freezer. But yeah, we're gonna phase out of chickens, though, because I think I just want more ducks. More ducks, less chickens. Everybody has chickens.
We built this system, and we have a trust in this system that's actually let us down. It's not working. The first thing a CEO says as soon as they've got a product recall, when we have an overzealous inspector or a little tyrant, I go to the commissioner at FSIS and get them fired. That's just the way we do business. A small plant like ours, we don't have that option. I didn't know that they were measuring efficacy by pounds per hour. I thought it was about safe food.
All right, let's talk about the USDA, or as it's known in its full, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This federal agency is in charge of all things food, farming, and natural resources in the U.S. It keeps an eye on what we eat, helps farmers stay in business, and promotes what it calls sustainable practices. But, as with many government agencies, things are not quite as simple as they seem. Oh boy, there is some tea here. The USDA is supposed to support farmers, right? Guess who they often are really cozy with? The huge agribusiness corporations. Yep, big ag guys. Critics say that instead of looking out for small farmers, they're often just passing policies that are making life easier for those mega companies. People are saying it's bad for sustainable farming and, you guessed it, local food systems. So much for supporting the little guy. There's also a huge issue with the organic standard loopholes. The rumor is that they've been super flexible with these rules. People say they're letting big industrial farms slap an organic label on things that may not really be organic, or at least not by the old school standards. Hydroponics is basically soil-free farming, and some, let's call them questionable animal welfare practices are making the cut. Maybe not. I don't know. Fact check me if you want. I don't know. There's also the school lunch issues where you think your schools would be, I don't know, safe to eat healthy food for kids. But to be honest, no. At one point, the USDA actually let pizza count as a vegetable because it had tomato sauce. And let's not even talk about the other food industry players pushing for some leniency in nutrition for school lunches. Why are we feeding them junk? Also, I want to put in a quick note. I remember in high school, I was in a big high school. It was like a quarter of a mile long. High school was huge. There was soda and candy machines all over the place. There were 4 huge like soda candy machines in like this one area, and then there were 4 right next to it. And I think that was just a little much, to be honest. I don't think that you should be giving that to kids. If my kid went to a public school, I would not appreciate there being access to sodas and candies and have access to it 24/7, you know, while they're at school. 8-5, whatever. But anyways, let's move on. There's also the GMO and pesticide drama. So there's been super friendly towards genetically modified crops and pesticides. Critics say they don't have the proper study of long-term health and the environmental effects before giving these crops the green light. And yes, these products are usually made by, you guessed it, big corporations. So yeah, the USDA has its hands in a lot of pies, but does not smell good in all of them. It's complicated, messy. Well, welcome to the USDA. The food system is a little bit messy. So if Joel Salatin was invited to the role of advisor to the secretary, what does that even mean? If you want me to explain this to you, I got you. Let me help you out, because I didn't know what the heck that meant either. I was just like, oh cool, Joel Salatin's gonna be in the government, cool, yeah, let's do it. And let me just actually give you a quick synopsis of what that actually means. Who is a secretary? And in this case, we're talking about Secretary of Agriculture, who's in charge of the USDA. The secretary has a lot on their plate, overseeing food, farming, nutrition, and rural development, the whole shebang. And because of all the responsibilities, their secretary can't do it all alone. That's where the advisor to the secretary comes in. And the advisor to the secretary is basically like a trusted sidekick, and they offer specialized expertise on whatever the secretary needs help with. It could be food policy, environmental stuff, or even communication strategy. Think of it as being the go-to person for advice and inside knowledge about specific areas that the secretary might not be totally familiar with. This advisor might be even handling some of the delicate topics behind the scenes, like talking to big ag, lobbying groups, or managing controversial issues without drawing public attention. Now, in typical government style, the advisor's work is often kept under wraps. They can be the problem solver, the strategist, and sometimes, let me fix this person when it gets kind of dicey. But because they're so close to the secretary, they can influence major decisions about farming, food programs, and rural communities. So the next time you hear about the new USDA policy or the big shift in agriculture, there's a chance that the advisor of secretary played a huge role in it, quietly shaping things from the sidelines.
The farmer can sell the consumer a whole animal or half an animal. And the problem with that is it's regressive. How many families can afford to buy 500 pounds of meat? But that's the only system, the only alternative that exists. So the Prime Act seeks to expand that alternate path, which has made nobody sick.
I actually really like Thomas Massie. But if you don't know who Thomas Massie is, he's a character. He's actually a really funny guy. But he was a congressman from Kentucky. He's known for being pretty outspoken, especially on issues like government spending, privacy rights, gun rights, and well, anything that he thinks the government should have less control over. If there's a bill that increases government power or spends more taxpayer money, you can bet he's voting against it. Massie is actually a bit of a tech genius. He graduated from MIT with not 1, but 2 degrees in electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. And before he got into politics, he was an inventor and he holds multiple patents. Now, in Congress, he's a part of the Libertarian crowd, which means he's all about individual freedoms and keeping the government as small as possible.
We're cramming all government spending into one bill, and instead of deciding what to spend on, we're saying, well, let's just spend at least as much as we spent last year and not worry about running any of these bills through committee or debating how much we should spend on.
I like small government. Weird. He's not afraid to go against his own party, and in fact, he's kind of famous for it. He tried to get Congress to actually show up in person to vote on the huge COVID-19 relief bill instead of voting remotely, which made everyone mad. And even President Trump called him a third-rate grandstander. And he was like, well, I'm just getting my job, which he was. I was like, you go, dude. Thomas Massie lives in a solar-powered homestead in Kentucky where he raises cattle, grows his own food, and basically lives an off-grid lifestyle because he's a farmer at heart, and that's what he's super vocal about, is not letting big government tell farmers what to do. In short, he's that guy in Congress who refuses to play by the usual rules and values independence in every sense of the word and loves getting into debates over government control. A political maverick. So, since Thomas Massie was a big proponent in getting that Prime Act thing going on, if you're a farmer and you farm meat especially and you want to sell it, like, this is something that you should probably know about. You should understand what the Prime Act is. Let's dive into that. It's short for Processing Revival and Interstate Meat Exemption Act. And it's all about giving local farmers and processors more freedom when it comes to meat sales. Under the current federal law, meat has to be processed in a USDA inspected facility if it's going to be sold to consumers, even if it's just for local sales. And these USDA facilities, there are fewer and fewer of them, especially in rural areas. So for small farmers, getting their meat processed can be a logistical and financial nightmare. The Prime Act would allow for individual states to permit farmers to sell meat processed in state-inspected or custom slaughterhouses within the state, even if those facilities aren't USDA inspected. This means that farmers could process and sell meat locally without jumping through all the federal hoops, giving small farms and local meat processors a major boost. Why is this so controversial, you ask? Well, supporters say that it's about food freedom. They argue that people should be able to buy locally produced meat without all of the bureaucratic red tape. After all, local farmers often produce higher quality and more sustainable meat, right? They also point out that the USDA requirements make it hard for small farmers to compete with big ag, which also has the resources to deal with all the inspections and transport to USDA facilities. Hold up, what about safety? If the government doesn't have any federal oversight, they argue that lack of federal standards could open the door for health issues. So if passed, the Prime Act would really shake things up, and it would mean more power to local farmers and potentially less reliance on big meat processors. But it would also challenge the USDA's strict meat and safety protocols. Before we ever had these protocols put in place, I mean, people were raising their own meat on their own farms anyways. And literally, you could just go to your neighbor. I could walk outside and go to my neighbor right now and ask them if I can get like a cow and right in the yard and then just take it home, put it in my freezer. Am I gonna die from that? Like, I don't know. I think there's a whole conversation here about, are you an adult enough person to make an adult decision about what you want to purchase? Or do you really trust the government to make those decisions for you? I don't know about you, but I'm an adult and I'm a hungry adult because my stomach's growling. And I think that if I want to buy the neighbor's beef, I could do that without having the government come and tell them whether they can or cannot sell it to me. So that's just my opinion. Just throwing it out there. Now, this goes on and on to talk about all these other various things, but I really just want to hit on two other honorable mentions in this, and it's going to be Robert Kennedy and Elon Musk. And if you live under a rock, you might not know who they are either, but I mean, most people do. They're in the public eye. So, I mean, RFK ran for president, Elon Musk is like the richest man in the world. Here we're gonna dive into like a little bit of detail, some controversy maybe, and see, where they land in this whole big picture.
Take the NIH, bring it back to its original mission. When I was a little kid, NIH was the gold standard scientific agency on Earth. And my mother had an assistant who worked for her, whose husband was a scientist at NIH. I used to go down to NIH because I was fascinated by science. There were 122 new nations that began after World War II, and a lot of them were African and colonial nations that got their sovereignty, and they didn't have the money to have a real scientific agency. A lot of them would say, if FDA approves it, if NIH says it's true, then we will consider it true, because everybody trusted American science. And then Something happened to NIH. There was a lot of corporate capture. Most importantly, in 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act was passed. And that act gave NIH and NIH individual scientists the rights to collect royalties on any drug that they worked on. The entire function of NIH has changed, so that 220 new drugs approved by FDA and all of them had come from NIH. So NIH is now the biggest incubator of pharmaceutical products. You know, they're no longer doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is to answer the question, why do we have an autism epidemic? Why do we have an obesity epidemic? And there's only a certain number of suspects. You know, you have processed foods, you have PFOAs, you have neonicotinoid pesticides, atrazine, glyphosate, cell phone radiation. There's a limited universe, and you can figure out pretty easily which ones are causing which effects. NIH does not do that science. In fact, if you try to do that science, you can look at all that. I'm going to study and find out, why do we have an autism epidemic? Why do we have an obesity epidemic? You could easily jeopardize your job in your future.
All right, so RFK, also known as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., sometimes also called Bobby Kennedy, is a fascinating, controversial public figure, a seriously famous name. He is actually the nephew of President John F. Kennedy. And also he's the son of Robert Kennedy, the former U.S. Attorney General and U.S. Senator that was tragically assassinated in 1968. There's a whole story on the Kennedy family. Like, if you want to go into the Kennedys, like, there's a lot there to unpack. But we can save that for another day. You think he'd stick to the standard political path, but he's kind of like diverted from his family a little bit. Let's just dive into it so you can understand. So he's an environmental lawyer by trade, and he spent a big chunk of his career fighting for clean water, conservation, and public health. He was actually really well known in the environmental world for his work with Riverkeeper and the Natural Resources Defense Council. And for years, he was seen as a passionate environmental advocate, very pro-nature, pro-public health, and anti-pollution. Then things started to get interesting. Over the past couple decades, RFK Jr. became increasingly outspoken on vaccines. He's known for being extremely critical of vaccines and the pharmaceutical industry. He's questioned vaccine safety, calling for more research into potential side effects, and he's argued that the government and big pharma aren't being fully transparent.
And some of that money goes to scientists who work in NIH. There's 6 scientists who get to collect $150,000 a year forever. Well, of course, if you have those kind of perverse economic incentives and conflicts of interest, it is going to subsume the regulatory function. A drug that you're supposed to be regulating, you may turn a blind eye to some of the problems with that drug, and you may do everything you can to get it through the regulatory process.
This stance has brought a lot of backlash, especially from public health experts who argue that his views are spreading vaccine hesitancy and misinformation. Now, he stepped into politics himself. In 2024, this year, he ran for the president of the United States as an independent after being basically kicked out by the Democratic Party. Ultimately, he dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump, where he was set to pitch massive shifts in health policy and become Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's talking about issues like government overreach, freedom of choice, and even calling out corporate corruption, especially in health and agriculture, which has resonated with a lot of disillusioned voters from across the political spectrum. So Bobby Kennedy is kind of the blend of the Kennedy legacy, environmental activism, controversial stances, and a kind of anti-establishment. Whether people see him as a bold truth teller or deeply problematic kind of depends on where they're coming from, but either way, he's making a major comeback in American politics, and he's kind of a wild card right now. So what exactly is the Secretary of Health and Human Services? It's the person in charge of managing all things health related in the US. This role is huge. We're talking about overseeing programs like Medicare, Medicaid, the CDC, and even the FDA. Yep, FDA regulates everything from your morning coffee to your drugs. So the Secretary's job is all about making sure that the country stays healthy, making critical decisions on health policy, and advising the president on, well, all things health.
I'm going to go down to NIH during my first week in office, and I'm going to assemble all the division chairs and the branch chairs. I'm going to say to them, we have NIH has a $42 billion annual budget. It distributes that money to 56,000 scientists, mainly at universities, to develop new drugs and to do, studies. And I'm going to say we are going to make it our priority now to fund studies that are going to tell us what's causing this epidemic. I'm also going to call in all the scientific journals into the Justice Department. You've been lying to the public. You are representing yourself as a neutral, reliable source of health information. You have done tremendous damage to public health. You are publishing fake science that is designed to promote the mercantile ambitions of the pharmaceutical industry.
Now let's jump over to Elon Musk. So he's the founder and the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla and several other ventures. He's, I think, the richest man in the world right now, but I could be wrong. SpaceX is actually a company is working on to make space travel a reality for regular people. Tesla is the leading company in electric car revolution, and they're pushing for a future where we drive electric cars, save the planet, and don't rely on fossil fuels. It's not such a bad idea, but I don't think that's gonna work out, if we just make the change like that. They're trying to. Then there's the Neuralink, where they're basically trying to connect human brains to computers. It's kind of weird. The Boring Company, which is digging tunnels to solve traffic, and Twitter. Yeah, Twitter, the freedom of speech platform. He bought the platform in 2022 in response to freedom of speech issues, and it's kind of been a wild ride since. I don't have a Tesla, and I'm probably never going to go in outer space, so whatever. Musk was born in South Africa in 1971, and he moved to the US and founded Zip2, which sold for nearly $300 million. And then PayPal, which sold to eBay for like $1.5 billion. Everybody knows PayPal. PayPal is I think they own Venmo. They may own Cash App. I could be wrong about that, but literally it's become one of the main platforms for money exchange electronically. Musk's also famous for his controversial tweets, clashes with other tech billionaires, and sometimes even his business moves feel like they came straight out of left field. Critics call him arrogant, and his supporters say he's a visionary who is trying to make the world a better place, even if his methods are unconventional. But regardless of whether you love or hate him, you can't deny that the influence Musk has on everything from electric cars to how we think about the future of technology. He's kind of a genius. So since he's been appointed the governmentalist czar, I wish that my Trump impersonations were so much better.
You can take my ears, but you cannot take my liberty.
I should just really stop. I mean, I could be blonde-haired and orange just like Donald Trump, but I cannot be as cool as that guy. He's way cooler than me. So anyways, what is a waystar? The government waystar. Well, it's literally a person sent to clean up the corruption in the government and make sure that no one's throwing away taxpayer money. But there is a twist. It's not an actually real official position. There's no job description in the Constitution for czar, but over the years, this term has been slapped on anyone the president picks to deal with major issues. And to be honest, I think we kind of need one. In case you didn't know, tariffs are taxes that government places on imported goods. So this means that stuff that's coming into the country from another country, the government can basically put a tax on it to make it more expensive. And the whole point of this is to protect local businesses so that if a foreign product is coming in, they can make it pricier so that people might buy the domestic stuff instead. Think of it like this. If you love your favorite imported candy or beer, but suddenly it costs more because of the tax, and you're like, I'll just grab something else, like local or domestic beer, then that's how that works. They're trying to influence your decision. It's government. Countries could throw their tariffs back at you, and it could lead to what's called a trade war. Yeah, that sucks. Excise taxes are like the government's way of saying, hey, we're gonna tax the stuff that we want you to use less of. Basically, it's a sneaky way of influencing your behavior, and those taxes get added to things like cigarettes, alcohol, and gasoline. The government also slaps an excise tax to discourage people from buying these things because, they're not so great for your health and or the environment. So, it makes sense. I have mixed feelings about this, but that's just the way it is. They could tax you for every time you buy a pack of smokes. You're not just paying for the smoke, so you're also helping fund the healthcare system to deal with the effects of the smoking. So, it's It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't like the idea of like gouging prices to begin with. So I mean, like throwing extra taxes on stuff just to influence your decisions, just kind of like, it's a little skeezy, I feel like. So how do we even get to the point of having an income tax to begin with? I mean, I could do like a whole story time on this. But like the Cliff Notes version, we'll just say, here's how it began. It all kicked off during the Civil War. It didn't last. To fund the war efforts, the government passed the first federal income tax in 1861. And it was a flat tax, just 3% on incomes over like $800, something like that. So it was like super cheap, right? And when the war ended, the tax went away. And fast forward in 1894, they tried to push another income tax after the Panic of 1893. A 2% income tax was put on the earnings of anybody over $4,000, and the Supreme Court shut it down because it was declared unconstitutional. I don't know. Think about that. Enter President William Howard Taft. He needed a way to get around the pesky court decision, so he came up with a brilliant move and proposed a constitutional amendment that would allow the government to tax income without the Supreme Court being able to stop it. This eventually led to the passing of the 16th Amendment in 1913, which allowed the government to levy taxes on personal incomes. This is so sketch. So when the income tax was first introduced, it was really just aimed at the wealthy, not me. Them. The initial rate was only like 1%, and it applied to incomes over $20,000, which, if you're not like well versed in history, back then that was a lot. So in fact, most people weren't even affected by it. Only about 2% of the population was able to like even pay this tax, but it didn't stay small for long. Over the years, income tax crept up. The rates began to jump during World War I, and then the government needed funds to fund the war effort even more, and this led to increased tax rates and broader coverage, hitting higher income brackets at first, but gradually the spending included more people as the war dragged on. But by 1917, the top tax rate had shot up to 67% for incomes over $1 million, and that was pretty hefty at the time. Then came the Great Depression. To combat the economic downturn, the U.S. government needed to bring in even more money. So people were added to the tax rolls. More people, and more people, and more people, and more people. Like this people. The tax rates were again increased. By the time World War II rolled around and the income tax system was deeply ingrained in affecting more of the middle class, not just the super rich. Post-World War II, the government maintained higher taxes, and with the expansion of federal programs and services, income taxes continued to rise. Today, the tax brackets cover a much wider range of incomes, and while the top tax rates have fluctuated over time, the number of taxpayers has grown too. Now, almost everyone pays some form of income tax, whether through deductions from their paycheck, filing at the end of the year. In short, it all started with rich, but wars, depression, and expanding government needs turned income tax into a ubiquitous burden that we all have to bear today. The federal intervention in the food system, farming, and energy is, that's a deep one. Okay, so we're just gonna get a little bird's eye of this because this could take forever. I don't know. There's a whole, that's what this whole channel's all about, is all this food conspiracy. There are the big name ones like the subsidies to major crops like corn, soy, and wheat that have helped shape the modern day food system. Some say this has led to an overproduction in unhealthy and processed foods. Then there's the USDA with its controversial food pyramid, which critics say push processed foods over a whole nutritious ones. And don't forget the GMO debate that some claim the feds have allowed biotech companies to push GMOs without enough long-term health studies. Well, there's a whole other story time on that one, because in the 90s, they actually made it legal to patent biological products, which was for the GMOs, but now you can do it to human cells and all kinds of things. People will definitely speculate on the role of corporate influence in shaping what's in your food. The government has its hands in farming. Farm subsidies that have flooded the big ag companies with cash. They say that it's led to factory farming and environmental damage poor food quality. Then there's Monsanto and its rise in the GMO world, with claims that the government's cozy relationship with biotech giants like this could be all about profits over public health. Some argue that the feds are using subsidies to keep small farmers out of the game, shifting us towards more corporate-controlled food systems, which sucks. Because why would you want to centralize your food system? Because things like COVID, I was living in California at the time, and the shelves went empty. That's really scary. It's also why I'm here. Texas, where I was born and raised. California spit me out just like Vegas did. Anyway, it's subsidies for oils and gas companies. There's also been the green energy push, which billions of taxpayer dollars funneled into this, like solar and wind and electric vehicles, but not everyone's on board. And some even say that this is about creating controlled energy monopoly, not so much the green stuff. There's a whole bunch, and you should really look into it if you're like interested in how the government subsidizes things and what it actually does. If you want to get a copy of the Constitution, then I'm actually going to link that down below. It's pueblo.gpo.gov/publication/pdf/1331.pdf. And that's a free copy you can read anytime you want. What the heck is USDA? USDA? Who said? You said? Who said? Anyway. It's a government agency that doles out foreign aid to other countries, basically. It's all about helping with stuff like health education and disaster relief. On paper, it's doing good. But some say it's just another, like, arm of U.S. soft power, American interests in influencing global politics. Some believe that it's just another cover-up for U.S. political maneuvering and pushing American ideals and influence worldwide. So anyways, critics point to the situations that foreign aid ends up boosting corporate interests and military objectives instead of genuinely helping people. And don't even get me started on these contractors and the shady ties to the big companies who end up benefiting from this help more than anyone else. What the heck is K-Street? Like, I didn't know what that was either. I had to look that one up. But basically, it's like a big epicenter for lobbying in DC, where all the big lobbyists and corporate interests hang out trying to influence government policy. But basically, if you want to get things done in Washington, you have to go on K Street, or you have to have your people there at least. Squirrel. It's a little bit of a dirty secret, honestly, but it's a place where money talks and politics listen, if you got my drift. So it's all about connections, power, and big behind-the-scenes deals. Personally, I think lobbying should be illegal, but what do I know? I'm not a politician. I'm not a lobbyist either, but maybe I should be.
All right, so since we're on the topic of Joel Salatin, and I have pulled up his books a couple of times while talking about this story, I wanted to shamelessly plug it back in. This is the book that I was reading, called Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And it kind of is like Joel Salatin's like political views on the food system. So if you wanted to like kind of get like a better idea of like what's going on inside his head, I think that's a good place to start. I'm definitely not getting paid to advertise this book, but man, wouldn't that be nice? If you want to go ahead and pick one of those up, you can get it at like Acres USA, probably Amazon. I don't think there's an Audible version of this book, but there are a few Audibles of his other books that he has out there. So, I mean, if you just want to get inside his head, he's written like 15 books. The guy is super smart, super sharp, very well-rounded human. But yeah, that's what I got.
So anyways, that's like a detailed explanation on the scoop with Joel Salatin and him getting a huge opportunity to help push our food system into a better spot than we currently are. Over the last few decades, it seems that it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. I mean, you go from the soil health, crop nutrition content, human health, probably human nutrition content. It's all just been downhill. So I think that he's actually going to be a really, really big hitter for getting us back on track. I think it's going to be a great addition to the presidential team. He's going to help a lot of Americans get control of their government again, at least in the sense of food and health. And a lot of the farm freedom, food freedom, all that whole movement. He's a great pick to help influence the decisions that, quite honestly, we really need to be, making. We've got to have people like this that are willing to come off their farms and make a big ruckus in the field of politics, because these career politicians, they're getting paid off to make decisions for us, and it's just the corporate greed is just bad, and runaway taxing bad. And I feel like there's just been significant overreach, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. I mean, Joel Salatin, he's staunch libertarian, a Christian, a farmer, a teacher, and now I suppose he's getting into politics. So, if the rest of you can make a fuss, a little bit of a fuss in your local community, and not let our politicians be pushovers for dollars, then, I think that we can really get our country back. Career politicians were never supposed to be a thing. We were supposed to have political leaders that were literally like Joe the doctor, or Jeff the veterinarian, or Bob the builder, It was never supposed to be a career option. So let's put some limitations on, what these people can do, and stop having bureaucratic takeover in our own country that we're supposed to be free in. We're supposed to have food freedom. We're supposed to have actual freedom. Let's just be free. All right. That's my tea on this today. You guys have a great day, and I hope to see you down in the comments. Let me know what you think. I really want to hear what your opinion is on this. What do you think about Joel Salatin? What do you think about him going in as an advisor? And yeah, check out on the flip side. Go feed my bunny rabbits now.